This is an account of how Lloyds TSB Bank, built up over 250 years, and in 2008 the UK's only AAA rated bank, was destroyed in 150 days. In consequence, Lloyds TSB shareholders lost billions. This is a timeline of what we now know transpired. We suspect that it's going to make you very, very angry. You will notice that the heading is secret loans, because secret loans were made available to HBOS, so secret that in some instances they were not even disclosed to directors who we think ought to have had knowledge thereof, namely the Bank of England directors. Because in October 2008, secret ELA, loan of last resort, emergency liquidity assistance of 25 billion was made available to HBOS in complete secret. In addition, the American Federal Reserve also loaned through its Federal Discount Window, FDW, an amount of 11 billion to HBOS in October 2008. And we have reason to believe from newspaper reports that similarly Lloyds TSB at that time loaned about £10 billion to HBOS. We have asked them to confirm or deny this, but they have avoided the question, so we assume it is true. Now, what is ELA? What is this loan of last resort? Well, the Bank of England is the bank's banker. It is the bank to which banks go for liquidity assistance and for their banking needs. So to put it simply, if a bank needs to have an overdraft facility in order to assist it over a difficult period, it goes to the central bank such as the Bank of England and asks for measures to be put in place to assist it. This liquidity assistance is done all day, every day by the Bank of England. It is what it is there for. At times of crisis, such as the crisis that emerged in 2007, 2008, special measures have to be put in place, as happened, and when the government provided so-called special liquidity scheme. This special liquidity scheme was publicly announced. It was available to all banks, used by most, approved by the European Commissioners, which is an absolute requirement for any state aid. And very importantly, all shareholders in all banks would have known that liquidity assistance was being given to banks by virtue of the special liquidity scheme that was available. But very different to SLS, special liquidity, is emergency liquidity assistance. This is the so-called lender of last resort, where a bank is in such financial trouble that it is in danger of collapse, has to go to the central bank for a loan of last resort because no other banks will lend it money. It is a function of the central bank that has been around since the days of Walter Bagehot, who wrote a book about banking called Lombard Street in the 1800s. There are very strict criteria to be complied with as a lender of last resort, but very importantly, when a state-aided emergency liquidity assistance is made available to a bank, if you are a member of the European Union, as the UK is, it has to be pre-approved by the European Commissioners. So emergency liquidity assistance suggests that a bank is in very severe danger of collapse. Let us now look at the facts. Firstly, you will recall that Northern Rock, a very small bank, was in financial trouble in 2007. An announcement was made that ELA had been made available to Northern Rock, and the very next day queues formed outside of the bank with depositors demanding their money. Almost £5 billion was withdrawn in the course of 4 days. This was simply because it had been announced that emergency liquidity assistance had to be made available to Northern Rock, and depositors were not prepared to take the risk of leaving their money in the bank. They preferred rather to put it under their mattress, and so they formed a queues to withdraw the money. The same would have happened if they had announced that ELA and federal discount window loans had been made available to HBOS and RBS. Now, pre-September 2008, Lloyds TSB Bank had been run by the likes of Sir Brian Pittman and Sir Jeremy Moores, and was then taken over by Sir Victor Blank and Eric Daniels. But these latter persons, these directors, had a desire to become Britain's biggest bankers. They wanted to acquire other banks to increase the profile of Lloyds TSB, and HBOS was in their sights, but competition law prevented this. Sir Victor went to Israel on a trip with Gordon Brown and to a drinks party, and there Sir Victor and the Prime Minister agreed that competition laws would be sidestepped. In the middle of September 2008, the financial crisis was deepening, and on the 15th of September, Lehman Brothers in America went bankrupt. The financial crisis deepened in the United Kingdom, and Her Majesty's Treasury called in the bankers. Certain of the bankers went off to solve their own problems, but RBS and HBOS and Lloyds TSB stayed behind. RBS and HBOS because they were in severe jeopardy of having to close for business the next day, as Sir John Geeve, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, said. They had run out of money, they were bust. Lloyds TSB was not bust, it was there because its directors had an ambition of merging their bank with Lloyds TSB, with HBOS. On the 16th of September, overnight, a deal was done with billions of pounds, in terms whereof Lloyds acquired HBOS, and he who is not given to superlatives said that this was a wonderful deal for shareholders. The FSA said that HBOS was a well-managed and capitalized bank, unusually because the FSA is a regulator and not a commentator. Gordon Brown and the Chancellor stepped in and publicly supported the bid. What we didn't know at the time, and only found out after the event, was that in October, and going on from October, the Bank of England, backed by the Treasury and the FSA, loaned HBOS 25 billion. The American Fed loaned HBOS 11 billion, and we believe Lloyds TSB itself loaned 10 billion. This was all kept secret. Peter Mandelson was brought in, became Lord Mandelson and the business secretary, and passed an order in council solving certain competition law problems. The terms of the deal were revised, and the deal was promoted as a wonderful deal. The SLS, the Special Liquidity Scheme that had been put in place and which was publicly announced, was approved by the European Commissioners on the 13th of October 2008, but no mention of the ELA or FDW was made. This remained secret. The four major accountancy firms were worried about going concern reports that they had to file, and approached the Chancellor and then Lord Miners. They said that they were concerned that the banks were not going concerns, and this was only overcome by virtue of the fact that the assurance was given that in the event that the banks got into difficulty, they would be bailed out. So the going concern reports were not filed, and in HBOS's case, the financial accounts, the audited accounts for 2011 were put forward together with the monthly accounts for June 2008, which of course predated the granting of ELA, FDW and the Lloyds 10 billion loan. A circular and prospectus were published in November. Again, there was no mention of ELA or FDW, although there was mention of liquidity assistance. As the ELA and FDW were secret, the only liquidity assistance to which reference could have been made was the SLS, which was publicly known. At the time, certain Scottish businessmen objected to the merger and came before the Competition Appeal Tribunal. A secret dossier was filed, and on the grounds of that secret dossier, the case in competition law was dismissed and costs awarded against these gentlemen. We believe that there was no mention of the ELA or the FTW in that secret dossier. The Scottish Court of Session had to approve the merger under the scheme of arrangement, and there was of course objection. Once again there was no mention of ELA or FTW, and on the 15th of January the scheme of arrangement was approved. The merger was on. On the 16th of January 2009 the ELA was repaid in secret. The FTW had been repaid in secret. On the 19th of January the merger was completed. In February and in May 2009 black holes were revealed and a rights issue was put forward. Lloyds TSB shareholders invested further in Lloyds Banking Group. On the 23rd of November a second rights issue was approved, further investment in Lloyds Banking Group. The very next day, after the Lloyds TSB shareholders investment by virtue of the second rights issue had been approved, the Bank of England announced on the 24th of November that it had 14 months prior given ELA to HBOS. It said that it could reveal this because Lloyds had taken measures to recapitalize. Only in April 2011 did the news come out that the American Federal Reserve had given $11 billion to HBOS. This was on an application by Bloomberg and Fox News. In May 2011, as you know, a further loss was recorded of $3.5 billion for PPI claims. The government, of course, was in a difficult position. If they had announced the ELA, there would have been a run on HBOS and RBS. Queues would have formed outside and the bank would have gone bust. There would not have been a merger. What they should have done, their second alternative, was to nationalize HBOS, allow its shareholders, whose shares were worthless, to decide whether to recapitalize their bank or not, and in the event that they chose not to recapitalize their bank, for the state then to nationalize the bank effectively. This is what they did in the case of RBS, but it is not what they did in the case of Lloyds and HBOS, because Lloyds TSB was standing in the wing waiting to solve the problem for them. Problem is, the Lloyds TSB shareholders paid the price for this option being followed. We say that had the correct course of action, the legal course of action, been followed, bearing in mind that the granting of ELA, being state aid, required EU approval and was public, there would not have been a merger, and then therefore consequently Lloyds TSB shareholders would not have suffered the losses worth billions of pounds that they have suffered. Lloyds action now offers you the opportunity to attempt to recover your losses on the basis of misrepresentation, unlawful state aid, and statutory claims in certain given circumstances. The website is www.lloydsactionnow.com.